Welcome to Conversations with Corrections, hosted by the Utah Department of Corrections. This occasional podcast features staff, incarcerated individuals, and other stakeholders of the UDC discussing issues that impact corrections, both nationally and within the state of Utah. Here is today's host, Department Spokesman Liam Trouchard.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conversations with Corrections. I'm Liam Trouchard. Today, we're going to talk about structured housing, which has been in the news recently. Joining us today are Lieutenant Aaron Johnson. He's our lieutenant over internal security. Also with us is Sergeant Ray Eberly. Ray is the sergeant over Antelope, which is our structured housing unit at the Utah State Correctional Facility. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you.
Before we start, we probably should clear up some terminology. Structured housing, what is it? Where is it? If one of you could answer those for me.
Yeah, structured housing is a program we have for our Level 2 offenders. It's located in the Antelope facility, the Hickory facility in Gunnison, and the one section of Dale in the women's facility at USCF.
And for those listening, that was Lieutenant Johnson. So here's where we're at. What is structured housing? Why do we have this?
So structured housing, like I said, is the program for our Level 2 offenders.
And a Level 2 offender as opposed to the highest level we have is a Level 4 offender, correct?
Correct.
So a Level 2 is someone who needs far more
structure.
Structure.
Right. They need more structure, right? So a Level 3 offender is our general population, right? Level 3 and 4, general population. The main difference between 3 and 4 is a Level 4 can get a gate pass. So our Level 2 offenders need more structure, so we have this program for them. In the past, our Level 2 offenders were housed in the UNA facilities at the Draper site. And when they were sent to the UNA facilities as a Level 2 offender, we didn't have any clear way to get them out. It was an eddy pool, if you will. They would get stuck back there, and it was up to us as corrections to determine whether they were ready for Level 3 population. And it wasn't really based on any sort of scoring rubric or model. It was just when we felt they were ready, we would based on their behavior, then we could get them sent to population.
Okay, now Sergeant Eberly, you worked in Uintas as well as working in Antelope now. What was that like for an incarcerated individual to be in the Uintas a decade ago or so?
So they couldn't get out. They would pretty much be buried in the Uintas until somebody deemed them that they were able to come out. Now it's based on behavior.
In what way?
Good behavior. There's classes that they have to do. There's programs that they have to do to progress. So when they come in, if they've been violent in the general population, they come into one of our low sides, and it's very restrictive. They might get an hour to 2 hours a day out of rec. They have programs to do. They have a thing called Hustle 2.0 that they have to complete. Once they've completed that, then they'll get another privilege level and move to the high side. They'll get more time out with more people out. So the first time when they come in, it's single cell of rec, and then when they go to the high side, it's dual cells. So they have more people to rec with. And then when they graduate, they go to the high side, which is an open section, which they get 4 hours a day with 16 inmates out at a time.
Okay, and for those who are listening, we're used to the terms max, supermax. Lieutenant, what's the difference between, say, structured housing and restricted housing, maximum security?
So when you hear the words max and supermax, maximum security, we would hope that our whole facility is secure, right? Not just that one area. So the difference, in my mind, a structured housing denotes what we do with the offenders, not the actual facility, right? Because our whole facility is a secure facility. So back before structured housing, when they called it max, like I said, they weren't. There was no clear pathway out. There were no programs for them. So that's what we did. We secured them, right? So we don't do that anymore. The programs we have now. When we started implementing structured housing, and we started getting training from the Washington State Department of Corrections, I believe that's who it was. They kind of piloted this program based a lot on, right, trying to get rid of this isolation type housing, because that's detrimental for a human being, and then trying to create pathways out of these restricted areas and get them into a less restricted area, right? And that goes all the way through. Our whole process is to put the offender in the least restrictive area possible, because the least restrictions we have on them, the more programs and education we can offer.
And that's more like society, right?
Correct,
when
right?
we release them, there's nobody watching over them per se like we will be. And that's where we need them to be, correct?
Correct, right? So, the saying is public safety through offender success, right? That's what we do. So when we implemented this, we implemented it as restrictive housing. We brought about there's a step out program, phases to get out. Certain things happen in each phase, like the sergeant just went over. You start with 1 cell rec, then 2 cell rec, then quad, then 8 cells at a time, which also gives you more rec time out. And that's the biggest difference between restricted and structured housing. Restrictive housing is anything under 21 hours out a week, right? If you're out less than that, then you fall into the restrictive housing category. And as we're going through this training,
So let me, just so I'm clear. So if you're in restrictive housing, right, you get out, you are in your cell how long?
so it depends on your phase, right? The most restrictive housing, what are they getting, Sarge?
Probably 2 hours a day.
2 hours a
So
day
they're in their cell
for 22.
22 hours a day.
Right. And so by the least restrictive, by the end of the Antelope High Side, how many hours a day are they getting out?
4 hours a day.
4 hours a day. And then when they graduate to, say, a general population housing,
They're out all day.
almost
Pretty
all day?
much all day.
Okay. And
They can get jobs. They can go to programming. They can go to the gym, the chow hall, all that kind of stuff when they're in general population.
okay. All right. So back to what you were saying.
So as we're going through this training for restrictive housing, if you're out less than 21 hours a week, there are certain guidelines you have to follow about how often they have to be seen by mental health, how often they have to be seen by medical, right? Just it was a bunch of restrictions on even staff of how we had to manage these people, right? So the goal was out of that, when we realized it's based on out of cell time. When we got to that point, that's where we got with structured housing, because once you're out 21 hours or more, it's what we would call
You mean
structured
out more
housing.
than 3 hours, just to clarify
Yeah,
that.
a day.
Right, yeah.
Right, out more than 3 hours a day.
Okay.
Then you're going to get into the structured housing category, and it gives us a lot more room as staff about what we have to offer and what we can offer these offenders, right? So as we started to implement this, back in Draper, it was physically limiting, right? Because we had fewer sections and fewer opportunities to have rec. We actually would start our recs at 4 a.m.
Yes.
to go, and went to about 10 o'clock, midnight.
Yes.
Because they had to be let out by themselves or just with their own
Right.
cell.
Yeah, from a 1 cell, 2 cell, 4 cell rec, and we only had the 1 day room to allow that to happen in, right? So the new facility, I think, creates more opportunities. In the most restrictive areas, we have the ability to run 8 recs at a time.
Yes, that's
right?
correct.
So in the most restrictive areas, we have the ability to run 8 recs at a time. And the reason, it was designed that way is the most restrictive recs are the smallest recs, right? But the sections hold as many. So you have to be able to rotate through them. So the new building definitely offers way more opportunity for that. So as we started getting into the rec schedules, and then we started getting programs for them, originally it was a 45-day per phase, 3 phases at a time, 1, 2, 3, 45 days. And if you passed those phases with positive behavior, then you could be reevaluated for general population, right? And that was a direct pathway out that the offenders could look at, and they could know where they were going, right? And that wasn't what we had in the past. We had offenders that were in the UNAs for a decade, maybe more, right? Because there was no clear way out.
And that still exists, that possibility, correct? That they could be in a restricted housing based on their behavior. If they pass these phases, they move out. If they don't pass these phases, they stay.
Correct, but it's what they do, not what we do, right? That's the biggest difference. In years past, it was, well, we don't feel like, whether your behavior shows it or not, we don't feel like you're ready for level 3 population, right? Now it's, this is what you need to do to get out to general population. And every offender in Antelope they know what those steps look like, right? So to get to restrictive housing, there's one of 3 pathways, right? You're either a violent offender, you severely assault someone in the institution, or with that, have a weapon, right? If you're found with a weapon, we don't require you to use that weapon before you go to restrictive housing. We assume you had it for malintent, and you get referred to restrictive housing. The other pathway would be if you have a level 4 safety. So that means you have verifiable safety concerns with groups of people that we don't have the ability to to house you safely in level 3 population, right? And the third way would be receiving points 22 or higher, I believe, yes, points on your assessment. And the way offenders get points is negative behaviors, right? So the more extreme your negative behavior, the faster you get those points and can get to restrictive housing.
So give me then, one of you can give me a way of, okay, we have 3 different people. We have someone who's been violent, someone who is requested a safety level 4, and the third one you mentioned. Explain to me their processes for getting out.
So the person that would be violent, like I said before, would go to the low side and be very restricted in their movement. And then they would progress to be less restrictive and then referred to a thing we call Structured Housing Committee. And if their points was to fall off or get lower than 22, then they can go back to general population if that's what the committee deems is fine with them. Or they have too many points, they will go to long-term management, which is our high side 3, 4, 5, and 6 is the open sections.
And I think an important step that we've forgotten about is when they're referred, all 3 will be referred to what's called the Structured Housing Committee. And that committee consists of the deputy warden over Antelope, a mental health professional, a medical professional, security threat group staff member, and the chain of commands over all the facilities that house structured housing. Now, when you're referred by a level 3 chain of command. There's a questionnaire that's filled out, right? Why are they being referred? What did they do? Which one of these 3 categories do they fall in? Where is the verifiable information of why this person's being referred, right? So the committee can look at them and place them in the proper structured housing area, whether it's LTM, LTIM, or long-term management, long-term intensive management, or restrictive housing. In years past, it would take maybe one chain of command to get someone sent to the UNAs, right? Now it involves not just the sending unit, but the receiving unit, and they look at all the information and, 1, make sure that person belongs in structured housing, and 2, where in structured housing that person belongs, so that we're not wasting time and effort for an offender if they're in the wrong program, right? So then once the referral committee decides which pathway they're taking, right, whether it's long-term management, restrictive housing, or long-term intensive management, then the Sarge here houses them and gets them on their programs.
As far as safety level 4 inmates, there's a form that they would fill out, and they would put on there what has happened to them or what has been talked about, that if they were to go to general population, they would not feel safe or be safe in a general population setting. At that time, we would deem them an SL4, safety level 4, and we would put them in structured housing. It's a little bit different than a person that would come in for violence. They would not automatically go to the low side and be restricted. They would probably go to the high side and have the 4-hour recs and have the programming that they have. They're just deemed that they cannot go to general population for their safety.
Okay. And then the third one was points, right? If the person gets enough points on the scoring rubric, over 22, I think you said.
Correct.
So is it as soon as they drop below 22, they can get out of there? Or do they, once they get enough points, then we just have to monitor them through whatever phase they're in to get them through back to general population?
Well, once they drop their points, they have to be reassessed, right? So that we know that they've dropped their points. And reassessments are scheduled yearly after the board or after an incident that requires what we call temporary restrictive order. You can also request it. It's something that the structured housing staff keep an eye on, right? Because none of us want them back there, right? We all want them out where they can be productive. None of us want them in prison if they don't need to be, right? So same thing. So yeah, once their points fall off and they're under 22, then appropriate housing is found for them, right? Not everyone can live everywhere, so we try to find the appropriate housing in the level 3 facilities.
Now, like we've talked about earlier, this is different than it used to be and will continue to evolve, correct? I mean, this is just a different way. As society changes, we figure out different ways to do things.
No, correct. And it's changed a lot since its inception, right? When I first went back to the UNAs to help get this set up, I think physically where offenders live and what phases they were in changed a dozen times, right? We were moving offenders to make sure, like, the top tier was phase 1, the bottom tier was phase 2, section 6 was phase 3, or sections 3 and 4 were phase 1, sections 2 and 5 were phase 2, right? So it's changed a lot. It's also progressed from a time-based program. It used to be do your 45 days, you get to phase up, right? So as long as there were no negative behaviors. Now we require programming. So not just no negative behaviors, show us something positive as well, right? Because anyone could lay down and hang out for 45 days. We want to see that you're putting in some work and trying to get out of restrictive housing.
And with the programs, it doesn't have to be the 45 days. It depends on how fast the inmates can do those programs, the packets, the classes in Phase 3. After they do the packets in Phase 1 and 2, then they go to Phase 3 of Hustle 2.0, which is just a program, and then they do classes. I think it's 5 classes. Once they get done with that, then they can graduate.
And that's something that's different now than before, right? There's that programming element here in
Yes.
structured housing.
Yes, it used to be 45 days, no matter if you did programming or not. If you did some packets that they would give you inside your cell and just kind of jot it down, they didn't have to put much thought into it. They have to put thought into it, and they have to do essays, they have to do crossword puzzles, and it all is graded.
Okay, so they're doing educational programming of some sort, and that didn't happen X number of years ago, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so now that we have them doing all of these things, how do we measure success? How do we know we're doing it better? Do we go back and check, just to see that, okay, previously we only had 3 people who were able to phase out of structured housing. Now we have 30 people phasing out of structured housing. How do we measure that success, I guess, is what I'm looking for.
Well, I think the overall success is just the fact that they have a pathway out, right? That's the biggest change. And it's been maybe 5 years, right, that we've been doing this. So it's, relatively new. In my opinion, 5 years is not long to get a program like this going. Right now, I guess the success is measured of how often is someone coming back and how fast are we getting them out, right? But the system is set up in a way that it's incumbent on the offender to determine that, right? And I think that's the biggest success, is that we've created a program, a structured housing that allows an offender essentially to determine whether he stays there or not, right? So, programming can't be forced. It can just be offered. And, success, it's even with recidivism, if you looked at it that way, who comes back and who stays into restrictive housing ebbs and flows. So I think the greatest success is that we have a system now that's ever evolving, but allows that offender to see the steps out and have some control over it.
One thing that I feel is successful is when they don't come back to Antelope. And I tell inmates all the time when they're going to the Bear, don't come back. I don't want to see you.
So give me a day in the life of someone. I'm a person who has just come back to restricted housing, the most restrictive housing we have. Tell me what my day's like.
So your day will involve we'll come in and do a check about 6 o'clock, and then we'll let the doors open if you're on rec at that time. About 6:30, you'll get about 2 hours, 1 to 2 hours of rec. There's a shower in the sub-day room. You can shower right there. They have access to a phone. They can call their family. They also, most of them have access to a tablet where they can email their case managers, find out about their commissary, stuff like that.
And a lot of that's even restricted, right? There's only a certain amount of commissary that you can get. You're only allowed a certain time on the phone. You're only allowed a certain number of visits, correct?
Correct. Everything is made by privilege level. So when they first come in, they'll probably be in A level, which is the most restricted. So they'll be able to call their family for like 95 minutes a month. They'll get 1 visit a month. And the tablet isn't as restricted as that. And that also goes with their rec time. If they're an A level, they only get 1 to 2 hours a day.
But will they still get the packets and stuff?
They will.
Okay.
They will start the packets. The class they will be enrolled. They have to fill out a form to get the packets, and then they will be enrolled in those Hustle 2.0 programs.
Okay. And then from there?
From there, sometimes they will have medical appointments. Sometimes they will have dental appointments, board of pardon, a transport. So we do all that no matter what level you are. And then after their rec, they'll go back in their cell. We feed them 3 times a day.
And we feed them in their cell as opposed to our general population, which goes to a dining hall.
Correct. We feed them in their cell. Yes.
And then let's say I move up now. I've moved up to phase 2.
So-
have I got it right? I would
Yes.
move up to phase 2? All right, then what does my
So
day look
phase
like?
2, they will get a little more time out, and they will also have a person that they rec with. So the next cell next to them, they will rec. So we call that dual cells. And they get a little more time out, 2 to 3 hours, I believe. And then also they still will do their programming. They get a little more phone calls. They get a little more visits. And then when they progress to phase 3, more time out. And then once they graduate the program, they go to our open sections. They get 4 hours a day. They get, I believe it's 295 minutes a month. They get more visits. They get access to the yard, and they get access to religious services and that kind of stuff.
Okay, and just so I'm clear, this is when they go to what we call the low side. It's the lower section numbers, correct?
Right, that's all it is.
And then the higher section numbers is the high side.
Correct.
But it's kind of a flow, right?
Yeah.
You move from this section to this section to that section.
Correct. When they first get in, they'll be in sub-day rooms, so it's 4 cells per sub-day room. And then when they go to the open sections, it's completely open, 32 cells in one section.
Okay. So I'm at at a point where I'm about to graduate, right? What is the process that I would go through? I mean, do I have to wait for a committee? Does anybody interview me? What is the process I go through to move from that final step of moving from Antelope or Hickory or Del Low side to general population?
Yeah, so once your points are low enough to get out and you've finished the hustle program and the restrictive housing program, you're re-seen by the structured housing committee. But even before that, you're seen by your offender management review team, which is the chain of command for that unit. And then they'll talk to you about, your programs, timeline as to when a move may happen. And then you'll be referred to that structured housing committee. And they'll look at all the progress that offender's made, and then what's the most appropriate housing for them, whether it's where in the general population that most appropriate housing. And then, the sometimes the longest part is waiting for an appropriate bed, right? So once a level 3 bed opens that offender fits into, then they can be moved.
Now, one thing we have at the Utah Department of Corrections is the inmate placement program, where approximately 1/4 of all of our inmates are housed at a county facility throughout the state. Would a level 3 inmate qualify to go into the inmate placement program, what we call IPP?
Yeah. So upon arrival to USCF, all our offenders are screened for IPP placement, right? They're all referred. Again, each one of our county jails offers different services and has different programs and different restriction on which offenders are going to be able to take. But no, we utilize that, I think, very well. We even have at least one county jail that takes safety level 4s so that we can get them in a less restricted housing as well. So that's when we talk about the most appropriate bed for the offender, I'm including the IPP program, right? So if that is the best fit for them, that's what we want to do, is get them into the less restrictive housing.
Okay. We've talked a lot about how we hope it works and how it should work. What are some of the challenges that you guys face and the staff face in implementing these phases and structures?
I think one of the things is being able to get them into a level 3 bed as soon as possible. Sometimes they have to wait just because it could be their gang. We want to put them in the right position so they don't, for safety reasons or whatnot. Or sometimes there just isn't that bed for that particular inmate.
And it's not because we don't have enough bed space.
Right.
We have room to spare in whatever facility we have, either Central Utah Correctional Facility or the Utah State Correctional Facility or IPP. It's the right bed for that person.
For
correct?
that inmate, yes.
Okay. What other challenges are you facing?
Well, I mean, with the restrictive housing, I think some of the challenges just on the unit, right, would be that movement as well. If I can't get someone out to a level 3, then he's holding up a bed in an open section that could house someone that's phased up, right? So it pushes all the way back, where I may have an offender who is eligible for a phase 2 but is stuck in a phase 1 section, right? And that can be frustrating.
How long do you think it usually takes? I mean, because I handle constituent services among my other duties. I get a lot of families calling saying, well, he's been there for X number of days. And in their mind, in their thought process, that's the number of days they have to be in a specific place. But it like you said, it fluctuates between people, right? It's tailor-made for each individual person. So it's not 45 days and you automatically move up. You may be considered for reevaluation and to be reassessed at 45 days or 30 days or whatever it is. But that doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're going to move out, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And every day we're trying to get that specific person out. We're working as sergeants and lieutenants and captains to get that person to the level 3 land. Just doesn't work every single day.
Well, and frankly, I mean, we have people that, even in our halfway houses, that get their parole date rescinded waiting on a bed. So it is that is one of a major issue is having the available space.
Okay. Well, those were all the questions I had. Was there anything you guys wanted to add that you think our constituents should know?
Well, I don't know. Maybe has kind of come up in our discussions about this. I think one of the big things is to realize when we house our offenders based on behavior, you're going to have a concentration of that particular behavior in those particular units, right? So, for example, our green building, which has our substance abuse program, you're going to have better performance from those offenders because that's the behavior, that housing, that their behavior dictates that housing. On the other side of that coin, in Antelope, that's where we house people who, like I said, that need that more structure. So when you see in the news staff assaults or violent assaults, and it's Antelope, that's our system working, in my opinion, because that's where we house those behaviors, right? So if there's it looks like a concentration of negative behaviors in the Antelope building, it's not a reflection of the staff or the department. That's the process working because that's where it's happening, and we've already identified those people as that behavior, right? That we're housing that behavior there. So the concentration of these, you see on the news, this assault in Antelope, this is an Antelope, this is an Antelope. In my opinion, that's our process working because we're containing it to the area in which we house those behaviors.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, Sergeant Ray Eberly, Lieutenant Aaron Johnson, thank you very much for joining us today. And for all of you, thank you, and we hope you continue to listen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This has been Conversations with Corrections from the Utah Department of Corrections. These podcasts are on our website at corrections.utah.gov or on the UDC YouTube page. Suggestions for a future topic can be sent to corrections@utah.gov. Thank you for joining us.